All right, guys. So as you've already seen in this course, there's many ways to do the same thing. So we started off with this get data function that we took in a callback, and I showed you how we could nest callbacks. It's something called callback hell. And if you want to do it that way, I think that's fine. I don't judge people's code unless it's absolutely horrendous and just horribly messy and half of it doesn't work. I don't judge people's styles. If you want to use callbacks, that's fine, at least in my opinion. If you want to use promise chaining like we learned in the last video, that's fine. I want to show you a third way that we can do the same thing, which is fetch the movies, actors, and directors in a specific order, and that's using promise.all. All right, so we want to just get rid of all this and just keep the get data. So we're not going to edit this at all. We're just handling it in a different way. So I want to put the response or the promise that's returned from this into a variable for the movies, the actors, and the directors. So let's say const and say movies promise and set that to get data, and then pass in our endpoint, which is ./movies.json. All right, so all we're doing is taking the returned promise from this function and putting it in this variable. So if I wanted to, I could then do movies promise, and then I would use .then on this, and I'll just pass in, I'm going to delete this after, but just to show you, I could pass in that and say console.log m save, and I should see the movies array. All right, because that promise is now in this variable. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the actors and directors. So let's change this to actors.json, and then we'll call this actors promise, and then this will be directors promise, and let's say directors. All right, so we have all three promises inside of a variable. Now what we can do is we can say promise, and then there's a method called all. So we want to say promise.all, and all this does is it takes in an array of promises. So we have our three that we want to pass in, which is movies promise, actors promise, and directors promise. Okay, so we're going to pass those in, and then we're going to add a .then onto this promise.all. So say .then, and then that takes in a function. And what we'll pass in here is data. And what we're going to get, actually, let me just log it, and I'll show you what we get. So we're going to log the data, and I'm going to save this and let this run. So as you can see, what we get is an array of arrays. And this is going to be the movies, the actors, and the directors. Okay, so what we get is an array of our promise results. And this is doing the same thing, right? We're still getting all of our resources, movies, actors, and directors, but we did it in kind of a more concise way. Now, if there's any errors, I could also add on a .catch. So let me see if Prettier will let me put this down here again, like that, and then .catch. And pass in our function, let's say error, and then in here we want to console.log error and save that. Okay, so now if there were something wrong, if I were to change this to like movies 1 and save that, then that catch should run. Okay, so there we go. We see our something went wrong message. All right, now this is really cool because if we have any other promises we want to throw in here, we can. So I'll go ahead and just create a dummy promise. We'll even call it dummy promise, and we'll say equals new promise, and pass in our function. That's going to take in resolve and reject. And then what I'll do is I'll just resolve with a string of hello world. Okay, so this could be a fetch. This could be any promise at all. I'm just doing something very simple, and then I'm going to pass that into this array. So dummy promise, Save that, and now what I should get back is an array with 4 values. The first 3 are going to be an array, right? Because that's what we're getting with get data passing in these endpoints. This 4th promise, though, is resolving a string, so that's what I get here. So it's an array with 3 arrays and then a string of hello world, because that's what I resolved in my 4th promise that I passed in here. Okay, so really, really cool. Very clean way to make multiple requests if you need to, fetch data from multiple endpoints at the same time and have it, in the order that you want. Now in the next section, we're going to continue to work with promises because we're going to learn about the Fetch API, which is a more modern way to get data rather than using this XML HTTP request object. And when you use fetch, it returns a promise. Also, we're going to look at something called async await, which gives us an alternate syntax than using the .then syntax with promises. All right, so we'll get into that in the next section.